My name is Jay.
Oh God.
My name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Software Online. I've been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used to work
Okay.
at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Game Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software, by the same name, which is an indie studio, and I've been here for about 8 years now. I also run a massive community. We've got about 180,000 people in Discord, and most of what I do is try to teach other people how to make games, teach them that they can make games, show them the tools to do so, and try to do everything without any paywalls or bullshit in the way. It's incredibly important to me that we keep making games and that the next generation has the tools to do so that our medium doesn't die out.
Okay.
And it never will. And that's the whole intention of all of this. So with that in mind, that community brought me this and tried to get me to sign it. And I don't want to. Number one, I can't because I don't live in Europe. But number two, I wouldn't sign it even if I could. And I'm going to kind of go through this and try to explain the reasoning as to why it would be the case, without all of the internet hate machine that's grown up around it. So let's go into how this works and why this is an issue to me. First things first, what is an initiative? So an initiative is actually not law. It is something that you put together so you can put it up in front of representatives and they can start the conversation. The reason why I have a problem with Stop Killing Games is specifically it starts the wrong conversation. If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it. And the reason why is specifically on this initiative, under its own description, it says, this initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union or related features and assets sold for video games they operate to leave said video games in a functional playable state. Specifically, the initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher.
Okay.
This isn't always possible in all video games, and it doesn't call out the specific practice that this is supposedly trying to defeat. It is incredibly vague and will damage all live service games. How would you keep League of Legends in a functional playable state? You'd have to re-architect the entire game. The game is what is...
Well, that's what people do. Yeah, there's a lot of people that have done that. Like, people did that with WoW. Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that. Sure. No, it's definitely hard to do.
Called client server. So in client
I don't think that companies should have to provide their source code. Like, they shouldn't have to give out their source code after they stop making the game. But if somebody wants to make a recreation of the game, that's okay. And they shouldn't be shut down. So, like, that's really my only perspective on this. Like, all of the rest of this could be right. Like, I could easily see where he's coming from with this. Yeah, sure. Wayfinder also did it really well. Yeah. We had an old patch server. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's really, like, the fact that companies can shut down a private server after the company is no longer providing the game. I think that's really the problem. That's actually the issue, because, like, if you have a game that's like, for example, The Crew, this is like one of the recent contemporary examples. People were able to remake the game and continue providing support for the game even after the developers stopped providing support for the game. And I think that's a good thing. That's a great thing. You know, even if you look at it from as abstract of a perspective as art preservation, it's art preservation. 100% this is good. He talks about that. It's violating the law because of licensing. Oh, yeah. No, but I disagree with the law. No, I don't think that the licensing and the copyright laws that we have are in the best interest of the consumer. I think that they give too much control and too much power to the individual companies. Like, for example, I don't think that Nintendo should be able to shut down a tournament for Smash Brothers Melee. I don't think they should be able to do that. You purchased the game, you bought the game, you spent your money on the game. You should have the autonomy to decide what you do with that game and how you present that game and what you, like, for example, like, you don't have to pay a, you don't have to ask, I don't know, like, whoever makes a hammer or a chainsaw, if you need to, like, you have to pay them a dividend. You don't have to pay them commission if you build a house and you sell the house. So after you sell something to a person, I think that person should have pretty much complete autonomy to do what they want with it, unless that it's creating a market replacement for the product in the market at that time, right? For example, a private server for WoW while WoW is still active, for example. So yeah, that's what I think. You buy something, you own it. And you also own the autonomy of how you want to use it. I don't see how, like, there's any benefit to the population that's not the case. You're not even a developer? No, I'm not. That's the point, right? But, like, so No, I'm not. That you're exactly right. I'm a consumer. I gave them my money. And I want to be able to do what I want with what I bought with my money. Period. It's that simple.
Models. There's a server and there's a client, and all of the math, all of the game, everything happens on the server. The client just displays it. And the reason we want to do it that way is so that you can't teleport around and do a billion damage. You don't trust the client. You trust the server. The client just displays what it's told, right? So if we
New World did the opposite. Remember that?
wanted to re-architect this, we'd have to take all of that server logic, push it back out into the client, and somehow make that playable in a multiplayer-only video game. That doesn't make sense to me. So this isn't going to work.
Well, I think a lot of people have done that before. A lot of people have recreated servers of games. And I think the reason why they're not happening as often is actually because they would get shut down. I feel like we probably would already have a playable version of Bloodborne on PC right now with 60 FPS. We would probably have one at this very moment if Sony couldn't shut it down.
All games, why is it calling out all games? And it's really easy to say like, oh, you know, that'll get worked out down the line. But we're dealing with government here. If we're going to be putting up these types of ideas specifically in front of government, we need to be calling out the right issues. Especially,
yeah, I think this has always been, it seems like, Thor's problem with this whole topic is that he doesn't agree with the way that it's stated inside of the initiative. But what he said originally, I think, is true, is that it is simply an initiative. And the initiative begins a conversation that is more technical about what the actual law should be. So I don't agree with the language in the initiative, absolutely. But I agree that it's a problem that should be solved.
If you don't have precedents.
Yeah.
Because now you're going to be setting precedent on something that doesn't make any sense with people that may not understand the nuance of our industry, all in the name of saving games. Yeah. I can't agree with that. So let's go into why this is happening, right? So why did this start in the first place? What is the specific cases they've called out that are egregious? And they have one. It's The Crew. So action on The Crew. The video game The Crew, published by Ubisoft, was recently destroyed for all players and had a player base of at least 12 million people. Due to the game's size and France's strong consumer protection laws, this represents one of the best opportunities to hold a publisher accountable for this action. If we're successful in charges being pressed against Ubisoft, this can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying more games. First off, I don't like the idea in this that it has a player base of 12 million people. That is not how long.
Yeah, I think this is another thing that rubbed him the wrong way, is that I think that he didn't like the language that was used in the post about it, and he thought the language was problematic for, I think, a couple of different reasons. Yeah, he didn't, which is like, it's different, right? I mean, it's different.
Games work. There is a large number of people that buy the game, and that player base slowly dwindles off until nobody is playing it anymore.
Sure.
If there's any costs associated with keeping the game online, which this was an online video game, then eventually it costs more to keep it online than it does to keep running it, right? So the cost outweighs the amount of income for it.
Right, and he's totally right about this, and I think everybody that's involved in this conversation would agree that we should not hold companies liable to continue providing service to a game when the game is no longer financially viable, because this would effectively kill every single live service game instantaneously, and they would never be able to be made again. Like, nobody, like, you can't do that. Yeah, it's simple. There's no way.
There are bad business practices that can occur in there. There are companies that will sell a online-only game as a single-player experience and kind of just put it into the TOS and hide it. But not all companies do that. When they do, we should be calling out.
And also, like, an example of this, I think probably the best parallel that we've had recently is Wayfinder. So Wayfinder was an MMO that then the publisher dropped. I forgot the name of the studio that's making it, but the publisher dropped the studio that was making it. The game really wasn't performing very well. And then the developers of the game came back and re-released it as a single-player game with multiplayer features, basically, right? And they totally changed everything about it. Airship? Yes. Digital Extremes? I think Digital Extremes was the publisher, and it was like Airship, something like that.
that specific company, not all companies. So let's take a look at this and find out more about the Crew itself. And if we pull up their Wikipedia, we can see that the Crew was actually created in 2014, which, much to the hatred of all of us oldies on the internet, was 10 years ago. Oh. So this was an online-only racing video game developed by Ubisoft Ivory Tower and Ubisoft Reflections and published by Ubisoft. So all Ubisoft, right? With that in mind, it said it was a scaled-down recreation of the contiguous United States and included both role-playing and large-scale multiplayer elements. So it had a massive multiplayer component to it. It is an online-only service-based game, and they shut it down 10 years later. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering the game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they posted as not an online-only experience. But everything that I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online only. If you're going,
I don't think that specific types of marketing should remove expectations from a customer for certain degrees of ownership. So I see what he's saying, but I don't like the idea that because they say it's online only, that means that they can just, for whatever reason, take away access and you're not able to access what you pay for. I think that when you take a person's money for something, you have to incur certain degrees of accountability. And one of those degrees of accountability is that that person will be able to use what they've purchased in an ongoing way. And I also think, again, that's not even really a problem. Let me just go all the way back. All of this stuff is not really as relevant to me. I don't care about any of this. The only thing that I really care about is that the companies that are the companies that are going and they're selling these games, after they stop selling and providing a service for the game, somebody else can do it instead. I don't think that a company, whenever they are not providing that game, can shut down somebody else for providing the game. That is the only opinion that I really have about this. Everything else is up for debate. Yeah, sure, maybe this is true. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. But you accept these terms in the TOS? I don't care about the TOS. The TOS isn't important to me. And the reason why I don't think that it's important is because everybody knows that no one really reads the TOS. I would argue that 99.9% of people do not read TOS, and I think the TOS is created in a way that makes it hard to read, right? It's using legal language, and a person can't read legal language. So, and also, like, a TOS should not overrule a customer's rights. So you shouldn't be able to just say, like, oh yeah, well, because the TOS says this, we can do this. There still are things that companies should not really be able to do. And also, this isn't really the TOS in the circumstance that I'm talking about. It's copyright law. And I'm saying that, like, for a lot of things, for the purpose of art preservation, if the content is not being provided by the company, I think that it should be possible to provide it with a third party. The terms of service are all inside of the game that you're playing. Terms of service isn't enforceable by law? Yeah, the terms of service is not the law. That's different. There's no more service. There's no more terms of service. That's a much better argument than what I made. Yeah. The TOS doesn't apply. You're not dealing with them anymore. Yeah, good point.
Going to be buying an online-only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And if the servers need to shut down...
Someone said contracts shouldn't exist. Of course contracts should exist. But contracts should exist in a way that's beneficial. And some types of contracts already are not allowed to exist. And I'm saying this isn't even part of that at all. It's completely separate. It's after the contract is gone. It's not even with the company anymore.
In the future, far in the future, it makes sense to me for the access to that game to be cut if it's online only. If it's a single player experience that has online only functionality specifically just to shut down the game in the future, and the online only doesn't actually add any gameplay functionality, I'd agree with you. That's a shitty business practice, but that's really rare. And in the specific cases where it does happen, we should call out that, not just all games and not all live service games. Further, there's more context to this too. Okay. The Crew itself came out in 2014, but it actually had a sequel that came out in 2018. And then it had another sequel that came out in 2023. And if we go to the Crew's SteamDB, which again is not going to be all of the player base for this, it's only going to show the ones who were playing it through Steam. It was on multiple platforms. We look at
there might be 3 people that were playing it total.
Here, it did start out with a sizable amount of community, and then it degraded, and it had a major drop off in 2018, which is the same year that it launched a sequel. This is normal. When a sequel comes out, a lot of the player base, if the sequel doesn't suck, will move over to it. And then the servers effectively die. You can't run a live service game on this few players. You can't.
Exactly. And a company shouldn't be expected to either. He's right.
Most of the time, especially not if there's anything else that goes into it. And if we go into that anything else...
And I've said this before about other games, is like, if you want to see what the future of a game is, look at the Steam charts of the game. If there's a lot of people playing the game, then it's going to be fine. And if it's a dead game and there's like double-digit number of people playing it, then there's a problem. And the game's going to die.
And we could see that there was license problems.
Yeah.
So on December 14th, 2023, Ubisoft delisted the crew and its expansions from digital platforms, suspended sales of microtransactions, and announced that the game's servers would shut down on March 31st. So they gave them 3 months.
Somebody brought up a good point in chat, and they said that they shouldn't be able to monetize the games because it's still not their IP. I really think I need to agree with you on that. I do. I think that you're right about that. Because if you're doing it for game preservation purposes, then you shouldn't be able to monetize it. So it's happened already? Yeah, but I feel like that, right? Yeah, 100%. They shouldn't be able to turn a profit. I think that it's okay to ask for donations, right? Like, that's fine. But to monetize it and to sell it, I think that's very problematic.
Usually I would say, hey, 6 months is probably a better deal. But if they're going to do 3 months, they're going to do 3 months. The only thing that I'd be interested outside of that is if there was a contractual obligation to do more than 3 months and they didn't follow it, if it was in the terms of service or not. Citing upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. What were those licensing constraints? Well, it turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies. And a 10-year running game likely means that they had license to them for 10 years. Yeah. And that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation. Now, I understand that's speculation, but I've
got a crazy take on this. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. The entire idea of you need to license a car in order to use it like this, crazy.
This type of a deal many times in the industry while I've been working in it. So it's not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that will say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. When you already have sequels out in the game...
I don't think that's a good argument that it's developer time and money, because the people paid their money to play the game. And I think the developer does need to ensure that the person who paid their money gets the value for their money. So if you can't do something like that without creating a positive upside for the consumer, then maybe a game like that shouldn't really exist. You see what I'm saying? It just because it takes a lot of time or it's extra work for the developer. Well, if it's too much work for you to make the game, make it to where people can play the game regularly on a regular basis after it's not being supported anymore. If you can't do that, then maybe the game shouldn't exist. It should calculate the cost ahead of time? Yeah, it should be calculated into the cost ahead of time. Exactly. Then don't make the game, yeah.
Has basically no players left anyway, it makes more sense to just move on. I don't find that to be a problem from the developer perspective, and I understand that people find that to be a problem from the player perspective. Yeah. These are two different...
And this is only true in the case of a game going end of service. And this is only in a doomsday situation, literally, right? We're only talking about this with end of service games. I'm not talking about this with ongoing live service games.
Ideologies. And that's okay to have two different ideologies. I just won't agree with it because I understand the burden that puts if we raise that problem in the way that we are right now. If you try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them.
Exactly.
And we're going to miss out
he's right
on
about
adventures like Final Fantasy XIV. And even though I don't play anymore, League of Legends or any other live service game. He's right. Them. You're talking everything, even phone games, as funny as that is. A lot of people don't realize.
There's no realistic way to have live service games if the company is required to upkeep the game in perpetuity forever. It would be impossible. Not even the biggest studios would ever do it.
is that phone games require online-only activity.
Yeah, but nobody's arguing for that.
Pokemon Go. What about stuff like Monster Hunter Now? What about any of these? We'd never get any of them. And that's why I think this needs to not
be
I'm not vague. It needs to be specific about the business practice it's trying to defeat, which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary and doesn't add any gameplay elements. That's the problem. So now we're going to go to Ross, otherwise known as Accursed Farms, the creator of this initiative, and one of the ones that's pushing it the most online. I'm going to let him say exactly why he thinks that this will go through very easily and why it is important, and then I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it.
Comes law in the EU? Yeah, it might be. Now, it's not a guarantee, but I think if we get the signatures, this passes. Why do I say that? Well, it's a few factors. Politicians like easy wins, and this doesn't require them to do much at all. And unless it involves gambling or protecting children, politicians generally don't care about video games. So this isn't of big consequence to them or most of their constituencies.
I'm going to stop it there for a moment. The assertion that politicians just like easy wins, so this legislation will go through, but the politicians don't care about a multi-billion-dollar global industry and that it doesn't matter to their constituencies is incredibly absurd to me. I don't think this is the right direction at all for a movement like this. I think it's incredibly damaging and it makes our entire industry look bad, both on the player side and the developer side. If we're going to be putting forward anything that may eventually turn into legislation, it should be passing because it's the right thing to do for consumers and developers and that there's some kind of a middle ground, not just because it's...
Yeah, see, this is what I thought. Because this is what I said originally, is that I feel like this happens a lot when it's especially like people on YouTube or people on streams talking about each other's ideas, is that it becomes like an argument about like the words that were being used rather than the idea. Because I'll be honest with you guys, I think Thor's right. I think Ross's argumentation, like this slide, is wrong. It doesn't really make sense. It makes it seem silly. Yeah, sure. Yeah, he's right about that. Now, does that mean that Ross is bad and everything he's trying to do is bad? No, it means that maybe this approach is bad. It's a naive approach, sure. Yeah, but I do still think that the effort and the initiative is meaningful. Does that make sense, right? And I think that's really where a lot of the problem comes in, is because when you disagree about something, a lot of viewers and people take it into, like, they turn it into something where it's like you versus this other person. Or like, really? There's like the third party, which is the thing that's trying to be pushed for. It shouldn't be like Ross versus Pirate Software versus Louis fucking Ross Bennett versus Asmongold. Like that's not the point, right? It's like how do you do something like this in a way that's effective? And I think that it's become way too oppositional. I don't think that's really the point of it. Yeah, the cause is just it's a good cause, and I think that people are arguing about it in a way that's not really productive. Does that make sense? Ross is probably right that this is an easy win, though. I don't think that it is. I don't think it's an easy win. I do think, obviously, politicians like easy wins because everybody likes easy wins. Like, I could easily say, like, this is a good argument, but it doesn't really do anything, right? It seems like kind of a silly thing to say. Corporations will fight against it? Yeah, I think so. And also, I think that the majority of, like, and I don't know how it is in the EU, right? But I know that, like, here in the US, a lot of issues that young people have don't get taken as seriously because more old people vote. That's the truth. So I think that a lot of problems that, like, younger people have, like, you want to talk about Social Security? Like, the fucking, every politician is going to have, like, a fucking bona fide stance on that. But, like, anything like student loans, completely different topic. So I do think that there is a degree of truth to the way that Ross is presenting it, but I can see how using that degree of truth as an argumentation could make you sound ridiculous. Or it could seem like it's disrespectful. Sure, I could see that. But again, like it's word policing, tone policing. I don't really think that's the point.
Easy win, and politicians don't care. This sets us off on a completely wrong foot.
EU law is already unclear on a lot of this practice anyway.
And that's dangerous. If we're going to be setting precedent, which could change the way that law works all the way down the road, then we need to be sending the right message, which this is sending a vague message that doesn't cover the actual problem. So this...
I don't think that anybody can send an accurate message because you would have to have the lawmakers figure that out because they're the ones that know everything about it. Like, Ross doesn't know enough about it. Thor doesn't know enough about it. Nobody does. This is like complex, hyper, like fucking specific international European law. Like people go to school 20 years, 30 years to figure this out. This isn't something you figure out in like 3 years.
Is not a win to me. This is a huge risk.
And we would be making it easy for them to settle it. It falls in line with other consumer practices. You know, how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it?
In the case of live service games, in the terms of service for those, you are not buying the game. You're buying a license to the game. And that's the part that's
the problem, in my opinion. I think that's the problem. I think that the whole you're not buying anything, you're just buying a license to use it, I think that this serves no actual material benefit for a consumer. Whether it's Adobe Photoshop, whether it is a video game or anything else, I don't think that just saying, oh, you don't really own the game because we say you only have a license. The reason why they can say you only have a license is because the government enforces that. I don't see this as a positive at all. It's an annoying practice. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but consumers don't care and don't read. Yeah, but that's the reason why lawmakers have to make sure there are rules about it. It's like going to a theme park and you buy a ticket, you don't own the theme park anymore. Well, I don't really see how that's a parallel at all. Like, of course you don't own the theme park. Obviously you don't own the theme park. You're not buying anything. You never had the theme park. You're just inside of the theme park.
really different here. If we don't like the idea of live service games as a whole, I get it. Don't play live service games then. Don't agree to those terms. But if we're under this weird idea that we need to get rid of all live service games or damage that practice in any way to keep in line with consumer policies, it is in line with consumer policies. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be there in the first place. So this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
The problem is that consumer policies are not in line with consumer benefit. That's the issue. Is that the current consumer policies benefit the developers and they benefit the publishers too much. And I think this goes for all types of intellectual property. I think that people have way too much control over their intellectual property online, and I find it to be very problematic. If you buy something and you release it to the world, other people should be able to look at it, talk about it, and have opinions on it. And the fact that, like, for example, DMCA is so overreaching in the US is insane. Absolutely insane. That's a separate issue. No, it is. You're right. You're absolutely right.
You're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game. In the niche cases where a studio is trying to sell a game as if you are buying it or purchasing it or using that language specifically, and they give you a live service game instead, I agree that should change. That language should change. You are not purchasing the game. You are not buying the game. You are paying to have a license to a live service experience. I get that. Is that what this is doing, though? The initiative is not trying to call that out specifically. It's trying to say that all games need to stay in a functionable, playable state, which is not calling out the language that is being used to manipulate the player. Call that out specifically, not this vague bullshit.
And finally, this is a diversion from really...
Yeah, so this is the problem. I thought this, the first time this came out and like people started talking about it, is that Thor's main concern is like with the language. I don't even think that, I'm not sure if he really has a big problem even with the idea. I think it's just with the language. But the truth is that none of us here can understand the language that like needs to be used. And that's why it's an initiative and not a law. You're going into law, you need to word it perfectly. Yeah, but it's an initiative. It's not, by definition, it's not meant to be worded perfectly. Like that's not what an initiative is made to do.
Serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
That's really gross to me as well. The idea that this is just a diversion from serious topics and they can get an easy win in and we can just push it through and there won't be a lot of pushback on it and they're not going to have to think about it too hard. That's crazy dangerous, dude. If you're going to be setting precedent, if you're going to be
I don't know about being dangerous, I just don't think it's a very good argument.
Something that you want to start a conversation to eventually become legislation, and these are the reasons for it, not only can I not agree with the initiative, but I can't agree with you. And I think that the tactics that you're using here are really disgusting. So yes, I won't agree with that, and I won't agree with Ross. There's no way around that. I think this is gross. To sum it all up, no, I will not be supporting the initiative Stop Killing Games. You're not going to change my mind on it because I find this language to be incredibly vague and damaging to the rest of our industry. I think that it will be bad for both developers and players down the line in the way that it is currently written. And I think that starting a conversation that doesn't get to the core of the issue is both wasted time and leads to potentially bad outcomes. So
I think that part of it is true. I don't necessarily think that it's a, what do you call it? I don't think it's a gross or disgusting. It's just a bad argument, right? That's the way I see it. I don't see it as a bad thing. But it's like, yeah, if you disagree with like the way he's like explaining the video, like that's whatever. It's not really that big of a deal. But to me, like what I care about the most is that if a game comes out and it's live service and they end the live service and you can't play the game anymore, somebody else should be able to make the game and put it out there, and people should be able to access it if for no other reason than for the purpose of art preservation. Everything else, I don't really care about that much. I don't really give a shit that much about it. That's the only thing that I really care about.
If we want to talk about this, let's talk about the actual bad business practices. In the case that a studio is making a live service game and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game. I think that we should be fighting about that. That needs to go away. A player should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license, not buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license, to protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be better informed to the player at time of purchase. So I agree on that. This doesn't bring that up, though. It just attacks all video games that have online-only components and says that they need to keep being able to be played indefinitely. That doesn't make any sense to me. Aside from that, a lot of people really like live service games as they exist now. So trying to kill off all live service games, as some people have said online, doesn't make any sense either. Live service games are a great way to get away from the real world. They're about social interaction between players. Some people get married in them. Some people met their spouse in them and then got married in them.
I think this is, again, a very good argument of why it's important that people can keep making the games and putting them out there after they get shut down. That's my whole point. Absolutely. Yes. That's the reason why.
Really cool thing for a point in time in which you're having that social experience. And to destroy that just because you don't like them is very weird. I don't think that makes a lot of sense to me. I also don't think it makes sense the way that Ross is posing this is why it's going to pass. I think that's incredible.
He's right about this. That Ross's argumentation for why it can pass is bad.
Incredibly inflammatory and could lead to a lot of damage to both what he's trying to stop and to games as a whole. To say that the government just doesn't care and this is an easy win and we're going to get it through is disingenuous. You're talking about a multi-billion-dollar global industry. To think that the government isn't going to be meticulously looking through this and looking for flaws and holes is absurd. So I think that it's not really that crazy to say the government hasn't really kept up with technology very well. Like, you can look at the way AI is approached or social media. Like, I feel like the government doesn't, it's not that they don't even really care. It's that I don't think that they possess like the tech savvy people that work there at high positions to make decisions that are thoughtful. EU is very progressive with tech, and I find it disgusting.
It could be different in the EU.
Mad about that, fine. Be angry about it. I'm not going to change my stance on that because I can't agree with this, both as a dev and a player. I see the danger involved, I see the vagueness in the language, and it doesn't make sense to me. If we want to fight for better conditions for players, then fight the actual problem. Don't make new ones.
Yeah, I think that really what needs to happen is that if you make a game, you put the game out, you stop making the game, people should be able to put the game out there for free. That's what I think. That's my perspective. I'll go ahead and I'll link you guys the video. I think Thor brings up some pretty good points with this as well. I don't necessarily think that he's wrong on a lot of the things that he brings up. I think that also the reason why, like, this is one thing that I've done this myself a lot. There's the video right there. I do this a lot myself where, like, I talk in a lot of extremes. And I think that he kind of did that with, like, saying that it was disgusting or, like, gross, which is, like, really not that much of an appropriate word, in my opinion, to describe, like, a petition for, like, keeping video games live or something like that, right? And so I think that rubbed people the wrong way, and that's why people had, like, a negative opinion on it. But I think that a lot of the things that he was actually trying to say some of them made sense. But I also read comments if you want to read it. Yeah, sure. If you discard your attempt to profit at something, let other people keep it alive. Exactly. What about for people that didn't purchase the game initially? Should they have access to a discontinued game? Yeah. Yes, they should, because there's never a there's not a loss of profit. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think in general, like, the amount of control that people can exercise with intellectual property and companies can exercise with intellectual property is not in the best interest of a consumer. Like, you have to keep in mind that a lot of these laws are written in the benefit of these companies primarily, right? These are the companies that are lobbying. Like, I don't know how it is in the EU. It's probably a little bit different, right? But, like, in general, yeah, if you buy Super Smash Bros. Melee, Nintendo should not be able to shut you down for making a tournament about it. That's ridiculous. Absolutely fucking not. You bought the game. You paid for the fucking game. You should be able to do what you want with the game. That's the way I see it. It's the same. Yeah, I just don't know that. So, yeah. Is the idea of the companies to get to give players tools to their own servers when a company wants to kill their own servers? Yeah, I think that's it. And also, like, I think this is a good thing. Like, it would be a good thing if the companies had to actually give the people that are buying the game the ability to continue playing the game after they make the game. And will this take more developer time? It absolutely will. But I think when a developer is asking for your money, then isn't that justified? Like, it's not like just as a developer, like, they just get to take your money and tell you anything you want just because it's in the terms of service. That's not really fair. I mean, if that was true, then you wouldn't have any reason for consumer protections, because you could just sign all those away with a TOS. But you can't do that because consumer protections matter more than a TOS, or matter more than, like, how long it takes to do or not do something. Thor's explaining one of these situations. You're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game, so it will never happen. No, I understand that you're not buying the game and you're buying a license to the game. And that needs to be communicated better to the consumer. I don't think you should be able to do that. Very simple. I don't like this idea that all software now is not owned. I don't think this is in the benefit of the consumer. It's not in the benefit of the consumer that you don't have autonomy over the software that you pay your real money for. There's no, like, why is this the case where they can just arbitrarily take this away from you? Now, with Thor's example of accessing the server, I think that they should easily be able to prevent you from accessing the server if you're cheating. Like, everybody would agree with that. But this is a different topic. Cheating would be allowed then? No, you just would be banned from the official servers. It's simple. What do you mean? No, of course you couldn't cheat. Absolutely not. No. Yeah, that's the same thing. To normalize the concept, they want to apply this idea for cars now. It's coming close to reality. Yeah. And this is what's happening, is that there's even features for cars that are becoming subscriptions. So I'll give you an example. So this is something that happened. BMW, this was like 2 years ago, right? Heated, what's this here? Let me see if I can find it. Heated subscription dead is on. Yeah. So basically what happened is that BMW tried to do a heated seat subscription. This kind of stuff is massively consumer unfriendly. And even if you buy something and they say, oh, well, you have a subscription to this, it's totally fine. Just when somebody says that, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good idea or it's something that should be allowed. So yeah, I think this is probably the best parallel. And I think this is the conclusion of everything becoming a license and nothing being actual ownership anymore. Keep in mind, everything is going digital and subscription-based. Everything is moving away from consumers having ownership. And that's the problem. And the reason why it's moving away is because when the consumer doesn't have ownership, the consumer doesn't have control. And it removes the ability for the consumer to choose not to buy the new product. It removes the ability for the consumer to change the product in a way that they think is beneficial to themselves. And it basically takes rights away from the consumer and effectively defaults them to the people who make the product because they own the subscription to it. This is in no benefit to any consumer ever. There is like never a single person, I think, that I can't think of a single advantage that only having a license to use Photoshop would be better than having Photoshop. Why would this exist? I can't think of any singular benefit. Cheaper monthly? Yeah, but they choose the price. And also, like, they're anchoring the value of that price intentionally. Yeah, it's for the consumer. Yeah, exactly. And so that's the way that I see it. But when it becomes a real issue, wouldn't you agree that all businesses would arrive and solve the problem and revert the damage? It depends on what it is. The more licensing becomes widespread, the more piracy will take hold as well. Jailbreaking my heated seats will be a more common result, in my opinion. Yeah, and you can think about how dangerous that is whenever you're trying to jailbreak the technology inside of a car. So this is the conclusion right here, and things even worse than this are the conclusions of everything being a license. And I find that to be incredibly consumer unfriendly, and it benefits nobody except for the publishers and the developers. It's massively consumer unfriendly. So that's the one thing I don't want to see keep happening. And I think that the companies have way too much control over their IPs. Like, for example, with Smash Brothers tournaments. Because again, keep in mind, Nintendo doesn't shut down these tournaments. The government shuts down the tournaments because they say Nintendo told them to. But if the government didn't listen to Nintendo, then nothing would happen. So that's the difference. Help the company, not the devs. The devil didn't see a dime. Well, I'm just saying in general, right? You said about Nissan? No, I think I probably did, but I don't remember exactly what it is. Do you think this is an issue with land ownership? If you don't pay tax on the land that you bought, they'll just take it away? I think that's a separate issue. It's probably way more complicated. But either way, that's my take on it. I think, honestly, it would be really good if... Because I think everybody kind of agrees that this is a problem in some form or another. And I think it's not really productive that everybody is like trying to look at like who's wrong. Like, it should be more of a collaborative effort, because I do think this is something that affects all gamers and all people that play games. And it doesn't really do people any benefits of like trying to like argue and fight about this. Because like ultimately, I think I want what's best for the consumer. If Ross wants that, if fucking Louis wants that, if Thor wants that, then it shouldn't be an argument. It should be a conversation. So that's what I think.